So I'm going to be talking about what is socialism. Today I hope to cover what do people commonly mean when they think of socialism today? How do we know the state isn't just a neutral arbiter between the capitalists and the working class? What is state capitalism? What's the socialist case for state intervention, even if it's incomplete without a bigger transformation of society? And how do we get from here to there? And why does winning seats in the bourgeois state come up short? Okay, moving on. So what do people commonly mean when they think of socialism today? I thought these were some funny things that I saw. So if you're against socialism, don't drive on public roads or call 911, or this is your economy in capitalism. And if you live in a socialist economy, this is to the right is apparently what your grocery stores will look like. So it seems like there's generally a fundamental misunderstanding of what socialism is, and I'll kind of go deeper into that today. So as we can see, I think a lot of us realize that when people have been throwing around the word socialism a lot, but especially in the US, they believe that state intervention in the economy is socialism. And the big reason for this misconception is fueled by examples of socialist parties becoming parties of government in Europe, and they've become kind of the paragon of socialist politics. So I thought this quote really wrapped up well kind of the American idea of what socialism is. You can be a little socialist, and thank goodness, this country has always been. Otherwise, we wouldn't have public schools and universities, public highways, Social Security, or Medicare. And thank goodness the public resisted President Bush's plans to hand Social Security over to the very financial titans who made out like bandits while crashing the economy. Or the years after World War II, when a little socialism built state universities and provided GIs with education benefits that created a good life for the American middle class. Think back to the Roosevelt years when a little socialism pulled this country out of the depths of economic depression and put people to work building parks, roads, bridges, and public buildings. And this was an editor from Newsweek. So it seems like in the US, or not even just the US, a lot of capitalist countries today, economic systems can fall into a spectrum or continuum between socialism and capitalism based on the degree of state intervention or ownership of the economy. So if capitalist states intervene, are these interventions for who do they benefit and whose interests do they carry out? And that begs the question, how do we know the state isn't just a neutral arbiter between the capitalists and the working class? So at times, state intervention was favored in capitalist economic systems. More recently, there's a push for deregulation and privatization with enthusiasm, as this gives more control to the capitalist class and increases profits. The time state interventions were favored primarily benefited owners of capital and sometimes benefited workers. The US portrays that state intervention does not accomplish the socialist vision of society that values people over profit. Economic crises like the Great Recession in 2008 and even now with a pandemic requires institutions that can gather resources far greater than the world's largest financial institutions are capable of mustering. Massive state intervention to save banks, insurance, mortgage, and automobile companies are given out while the working class struggles with foreclosures, evictions, inflation, and unemployment. This quote from Engels, I thought, was a really good highlight of all of that. The transformation into state ownership does not do away with the capitalistic nature of the productive forces. The modern state, no matter what its form, is essentially a capitalistic machine. The state of the capitalist, the more it proceeds to take over productive forces, the more does it actually become the national capitalist, the more citizens does it exploit. So under capitalism, state-run industries operate on the same principles of profit and loss like the private sector, and workers remain exploited in the same way. So if socialism is such a buzzword, and and state intervention equals socialism in a lot of capitalist minds, why do capitalists often use state intervention? And the reason is to regulate the market more tightly in order to save it. State intervention is not an assault on capitalism, but an alternative method of managing it. With capitalist deregulation and privatization, it's unsurprising that the government has to step in when there is abuse on corporations' ends. And this leads to kind of ersatz capitalism, the kind of capitalism we see like present during like Obama's presidency, which is the privatizing of gains and the socializing of losses, essentially a partnership where one partner robs the other. So an example of that are bailouts and nationalization of banks and financial firms, where working people's taxes are essentially used to bail out these big corporations. So what is state capitalism? So starting from the late 19th and early 20th century, we begin to see a concentration and centralization of capital, leading to the first industrial monopolies for oil, steel, railroads, and etc. Simultaneously, increased globalization made more competition over control of markets, raw material, and cheap labor. And these conditions created state capitalist trusts as each state tried to gather its domestic resources to develop and protect their own industrial powerhouses at home and abroad. And you see a degree of fusion of state and capital differing by each nation, and reliance on state intervention in the economy in varying degrees in order to promote capitalist development and to deal with other political challenges. So now that we've seen why capitalists use state intervention, why is state intervention something that socialists use as well? So privatization, as we've seen, like takes decision making out of the public sphere, allows corporations to cut jobs, wages, and services in the name of profit. This is basically an assault on the working class and takes away all the agency and shifts and has all the power to the bourgeois class. Nationalization of industries to save is good because, sorry, let me start that over. Socialists support nationalization of industries because it is set to save jobs and ensure the provisions of needed services. We must demand that basic necessities of the working class be taken out of the hands of private corporations and nationalized. When demanding nationalizations, these institutions must be placed under democratic workers' control, as these operate within a capitalist context and must be subject to pressure from below to address the needs of the working class over capital and profit. Socialism from below. In a society where all means of production are socialized, the economic output of society would be used to address the needs of the producers. The working class must exert its power to cut off profits and shut down production, and then must seize political power to assert its collective interests on society as a whole and against the capitalist class. After seizing this political power, workers can begin to reorganize production and distribution to abolish markets and productions for profit's sake and to replace them with democratic planning. And this must be self-emancipation of the working class. This can't be something like we see in, for example, like Stalinist Russia, where there is a new ruling class that is basically leading the working class. That's not how it should be. Democratic from the bottom up. So how do we get from here to there? Not through reformism. What we've seen time and time again is electoral success casts a shadow over revolutionary vision. Lots of people come into like electoral politics, bourgeois politics, thinking they can change the system and with their revolutionary vision, but then over time, I don't know, for lack of a better word, become sellouts to get reelected. Okay, Moving on. If the state is a capitalist machine, workers require a new democratic state that seizes control of production. Confrontation of the current state is required. Transition from capitalism to socialism cannot be incremental, as the state will enact reforms and progressively take ownership of more and larger parts of the economy. And this should be done on an international level. So this is my penultimate slide, but I really loved The Secret of Socialism by Steve Lee, who's here today and part of the Seattle Revolutionary Socialists. So I think I just quoted him because I think he said it best. To contribute the most to bringing about a socialist transformation, socialists do two things: participate in and build as much as possible any struggle against the evils of capitalism, and lay the basis for a revolutionary party by building socialist organization. The two are directly related. Revolutionary organization can help movements be more successful now, and increasing movements against capitalism can help create more conscious revolutionaries. Consider Marxism, revolutionary socialism, as an alternative to capitalism. Look into it, read about it, and talk to Marxists about it. If you decide that Marxism is the best way to transform the world in a healthy direction, seriously consider joining a Marxist organization. Do an investigation of the politics of the various groups that exist with the view to joining one, or even start a new one. Thanks, everybody. Hope that wasn't too fast.
Oh, yay, that was fantastic.
Fucking awesome. Holy shit.